What if the greatest treasure of human knowledge simply vanished? Imagine an entire universe of ideas, discoveries, and stories, gone without a trace. No one alive today knows exactly when it disappeared, or even how. And yet, for centuries, whispers of its fate have haunted historians, fueling myths, conspiracies, and endless speculation. This isn't just any lost collection. This was the legendary Library of Alexandria. And the truth about what happened to it is far stranger and far more tragic than the myths most people know. The most famous story goes something like this. In the 7th century, Caliph Omar supposedly ordered every single book in Alexandria burned. There were so many scrolls, the tale claims, that the only way to get rid of them was to use them as fuel in the city's 4,000 bathhouses. Day after day, week after week, the furnaces devoured the wisdom of 1,000 years. Blackened fragments rained down on the rooftops of Alexandria. It took 6 full months to burn through it all. It's a chilling image, isn't it? The idea that the greatest collection of human knowledge was reduced to smoke simply to heat bathwater. But here's the twist. This never actually happened. Historians today know the legend was invented centuries later. By the time Omar came to power, the library had already vanished into mystery. But if that's the case, then what really happened? How does the most famous library in the world just disappear? To find that answer, we have to go back to the very beginning. Around 300 BC, Egypt's new king, Ptolemy I, a former companion of Alexander the Great, had a vision. He didn't just want Alexandria to be a port city. He wanted it to become the beating heart of knowledge, culture, and learning. So he began building a place unlike anything the world had ever seen. This wasn't just a library. It was part of the Mausoleum, a kind of ancient research institute, complete with lecture halls, gardens, and dining rooms where scholars could debate endlessly. The library itself was said to be attached to this complex, housing storerooms filled wall to wall with papyrus scrolls. And Ptolemy wasn't playing around. He sent agents across the known world to collect books, by purchase, by copying, or sometimes by outright confiscation. Any ship that docked in Alexandria had to surrender its manuscripts. Scribes would copy them, and the originals were often kept for the library itself. Generous stipends lured scholars from across Greece, Egypt, and beyond, making Alexandria the ultimate hub for intellectuals. It was an empire-sized treasure hunt, and the results were staggering. No one today can say for sure how many scrolls the library held. Ancient writers threw around numbers anywhere from 400,000 to 700,000. Maybe those were exaggerations, maybe not. But even if the truth was half that number, it was still the largest repository of knowledge on Earth. And it wasn't just the size that made it legendary. It was the brilliance of the people who worked there. This was where scholars first calculated the circumference of the Earth with surprising accuracy. It was here that the standard editions of Homer's epics were established, shaping Western literature forever. And it was here that the first known library catalog was created, setting a precedent for every library that followed. One scholar in particular became infamous, Didymus, nicknamed Bronze Guts. Why? Because he supposedly wrote nearly 4,000 books in his lifetime. His work ethic was so extreme it earned him a reputation that still echoes more than 2,000 years later. But for all its brilliance, the library also became notorious as a battleground of egos. Scholars clashed over interpretations and buried one another in endless critiques. Locals mockingly called it the birdcage of the muses, filled with bickering voices. Yet even with its flaws, the library's rise represented something the ancient world had never seen before. A single place where the world's knowledge was gathered and shared. And the truth is, the library may have held far more than just Greek and Egyptian texts. Some researchers even believe the library may have held manuscripts from far beyond the Greek and Egyptian world. Alexandria was a crossroads of trade, where ships came from India, Mesopotamia, and possibly even as far as China. Merchants didn't just carry spices and silk, they carried stories, myths, and knowledge. It's possible that scrolls describing early Indian philosophies, Babylonian astronomy, or Chinese medicine were once copied into its collections. Imagine the collision of civilizations that could have taken place within those walls. Egyptian priests debating with Greek philosophers, while texts from the East quietly sat on the shelves beside them. If that's true, the Library of Alexandria wasn't just the greatest library of the Mediterranean. It may have been the first truly global archive of knowledge. And that makes its disappearance even more devastating because what we lost wasn't just Greek or Egyptian wisdom, but possibly fragments of humanity's shared heritage, long before globalization was even a concept. But nothing that grand lasts forever. And the higher it rose, the harder it was destined to fall. In 48 BC, the library faced its first true disaster. Julius Caesar had just defeated Pompey and found himself caught in the brutal civil war between Cleopatra and her brother, Ptolemy XIII. When Ptolemy's forces tried to seize Caesar's fleet in the harbor of Alexandria, he made a desperate decision: burn the ships before they could be captured. The fire spread faster than anyone expected. Ancient authors disagree on what happened next. Some claim the flames leapt from the harbor to the palace quarter, where the library stood, consuming thousands of scrolls. Others argued it was only the warehouses near the docks that burned, where backup manuscripts were stored for copying. But here's the most telling clue. Not long after, Mark Antony supposedly gifted Cleopatra 200,000 scrolls from the library at Pergamum. Why would such an enormous replacement gift be necessary unless Alexandria's collection had been devastated? Caesar's fire may not have wiped the library out completely, but it undeniably delivered a crushing blow. And worse was still to come. Even after Caesar's fire, the library limped on during the Roman imperial era. Roman leaders saw its prestige and kept it funded. Scholars still came, still read, still debated in its halls. But the empire wasn't a safe place for long. In the 3rd and 4th centuries, Alexandria was torn apart by violence, massacres, invasions, brutal civil wars, and even a tsunami. Each disaster chipped away at the library's survival. Imagine it: scrolls being abandoned during riots, collections looted, buildings collapsing in chaos. The library was no longer the jewel of Alexandria, but a fragile relic clinging to life. And then, a final disaster struck. The original library may have been fading, but a branch collection survived in the Serapeum, a magnificent temple complex dedicated to the god Serapis. For a while, it provided refuge for the last remnants of Alexandria's knowledge. But in 391 AD, everything changed. Tensions between Christians and pagans erupted into open street warfare. The Serapeum was stormed, its temple demolished in a wave of destruction. Accounts say the colonnades, the stoas that may have sheltered the scrolls, technically survived. But the books, they vanished from history. Burned, destroyed, or scattered. No one knows for sure. One thing is certain: by the end of the 4th century, there is no more mention of great libraries in Alexandria. The once mighty collection was gone. By the time Arab forces arrived in the 7th century, the library was already a ghost of the past. The story of Omar's bathhouse fire made for a dramatic legend, but in reality, there were no books left to burn. The truth is far less dramatic, but far more sobering. The greatest enemy of the library wasn't just fire or war or invasion. It was neglect. Papyrus scrolls don't last forever. They needed to be recopied, preserved, and cared for. And when the elites of Alexandria stopped paying for that upkeep, the scrolls simply decayed in the city's humid air. The greatest library in history wasn't destroyed in a single night of flames. It died slowly, quietly, over centuries. So what was lost? Some people imagine the library contained futuristic blueprints. lost technologies that could have launched humanity into a golden age centuries early. The truth is more complicated. Yes, the library contained works of science, mathematics, and astronomy. But most of the foundational texts in those fields survived elsewhere. The real losses were subtler. Thousands of plays, poems, histories, and philosophical commentaries that existed nowhere else. Think of it this way. We know the names of over 100 plays by Sophocles, but only 7 survive. What if the others had been in Alexandria's stacks? What if entire schools of philosophy, entire cultures worth of stories vanished without a trace in that library's slow decline? The destruction of the Library of Alexandria didn't set civilization back by centuries, but it erased voices, ideas, and imaginations that we will never recover. In the end, the story of the Library of Alexandria isn't about one fire, or one conqueror, or one villain. It's about something more haunting, the fragility of memory itself. Knowledge isn't immortal. Without care, without preservation, it rots, crumbles, and disappears. The real tragedy of Alexandria isn't just that the books burned, but that humanity allowed its greatest library to fade into nothing. And maybe that's why the legend still captivates us today. Because deep down, we wonder, if knowledge is power, how much power did we lose forever?